Member for Saanich North and the Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's an honor to stand today and to speak to Bill 30, Cannabis Control Act, and it is a time, I think, in this country, as provinces across the country do work to comply with the federal decision to legalize the consumption, the recreational consumption of cannabis. I think for some in this country, it's been a long time in coming, and for others, I think we've heard and other perspectives of still quite a bit of concern around this particular product. I would say that the feedback that I've received from people who've been who've gone through the bills have said that there's some tentative and general support for it, that the government has taken a fair approach to it. There's definitely some concerns to the approach that the provincial government is taking, and certainly some concerns to the approach that the federal government is taking. I think we see concerns on both sides, and so that might suggest that the minister's done a good job in striking balance as we are creating a piece of legislation, a framework from the ground up. You get criticism on both sides, that those that think you should go further are criticizing you, and those that don't think you should go that far are also giving you criticism while you've struck a nice balance right down the middle. And that has been the feedback that I've received so far. Of course, I've also received the feedback that if, in fact, we don't make amendments to this bill right now, then the entire world is going to come down around us, and that will be the end of things. And of course, I think that we know that that's not entirely the case. I think that this, as was suggested the other day, that there's going to be quite a number of amendments and changes as we understand how this bill is put into action. I think from my perspective, and certainly from some of the perspectives that I've heard, that we are taking a rather conservative approach to this. We're testing it out. We'll make some changes as we learn, and we're really responding, as has been pointed out by the previous speaker, we're responding to the approach that the federal government is taking, which is still yet to be passed, but yet we've got to get our action together and put our work in place for when the federal government does eventually pass their legislation through both houses there in Ottawa. I think to hear the member and the official opposition speak, BC Liberals' approach to this is a much more conservative approach than you're going to hear from this member or from our caucus with respect to the approach that we should be taking with respect to substances, substance abuse, addiction. Our approach is not a top-down, strict government command and control approach. That's the approach that we've heard, that this legislation really doesn't go far enough, and lots of concerns, and certainly we have a responsibility to ensure the health and safety of our citizens. And that is primarily why we do take an approach, one of more of a harm reduction approach to substance use, substance abuse, addiction, more of a perspective that we need to have better education on the impact that these substances have. And as well, we need a system and a government that provides support to citizens who are struggling with drug addiction and substance abuse. We've seen in this country, we've seen indeed in this continent and around the world that the war on drugs simply hasn't worked. We've heard a perspective laid out here, and the official opposition's position that we need really strict and strong enforcement. That's what we've had. We have right now a situation in which cannabis is largely being moved, and legalization of cannabis is largely being moved because those laws that are in place are being flouted by large percentages of the population. In addition, we have a fentanyl crisis where folks are dying of fentanyl and drug overdoses. And yet we pretend to a certain extent in our society, modern times, that in fact the drug enforcement, the strict enforcement, the command and control, top-down approach to this is working. I heard this morning Heather Hobbs from AIDS Vancouver Island on the CBC when I was on my way into town, and one of the things that she said very, very clearly as she's working with folks who are oftentimes right on the edge, and the things that she's saying is that criminalization is not working, and we need to get government to move to a situation in which we have, well, move and change the relationship which we have. Criminalizing people for what is a medical issue, a health issue, an addictions issue. Criminalizing these folks does not help. So our approach here is much more of one of harm reduction, of treating medical issues as they arise. And we've seen for decades now that as we've taken the war on drugs approach, we've seen that really fail. So we take a look at the bill. We're giving a general manager and a director. It's very much modeled after the bill that we have for liquor distribution in our province. I think that there have been some changes within liquor distribution which we don't see in this bill, and perhaps we will. And in fact, I hope we do see some amendments over time so that some of the opportunities that we see within liquor distribution and the production of liquor in our whether it be beer or ciders or other products of alcohol that are created in our communities, and that people have the craft industry, for example. I see an opportunity here for British Columbia. We're creating very much the same board. I think I've got some questions when it comes up as to the powers that's being given to the general manager and to the director, and how they can use those powers, how it's intended for them to use those powers. I have some issues when I read the bill with this notion of cannabis in plain sight. People can be arrested or charged for having their. I spend the minister, the Solicitor General.
Members, through the chair. Through the chair.
It's okay. Anyway, I know that when I read the bill, without having to tweet or to read Twitter, when I read the bill, there is a section called Cannabis in Plain Sight. So as we get to that bill, the Minister, the Solicitor General and Public Safety Minister will be happy to know that I'm giving him forewarning. I'll ask a question about it and a thumbs up down there, so thank you. And I believe very little I put on Twitter. Anyway, or read on Twitter. I think that one of the pieces of this bill that I will like to canvass more deeply in the committee stage is some of the issues that arise around non-private property owners, and I think that this is going to be a challenge, and part of the challenge with cannabis and it being different than alcohol, and I don't need to tell anybody this, is that you smoke one and you drink another. And when you smoke one, you create a problem for people around you, whereas if you drink one, it's really just a problem that you're creating for yourself. But nonetheless, there's this whole interplay in this bill around you can consume in public as long as it's not in front of kids and around parks and around the parks where kids can, I can't remember the exact language, but kids frequent anyways. So you can consume publicly as if it were tobacco, but yet then you can't be intoxicated publicly. That can be a problem. And I'm getting direction from the minister as we go. Anyway, there's this whole interchange. And then as well, if you have a place that you own that you can consume it, that's fine. If you rent or there's all sorts of layers to this, which I think, might marginalize part of our society. Let's just simplify it. And I'm concerned about how those that would be marginalized already in society might be further marginalized by this bill, and we can take a look at that further as we get into committee stage. Also, I think that around the craft market, the craft piece of this, which I think we've seen in British Columbia especially with beer, but also with spirits, we've got incredibly creative and imaginative people who make wonderful products. And around the world, where there's been greater levels of socialization for alcohol products than there is for cannabis, and I recognize that some of the interplay in this house right now, it's going to take some time, but as we send our beers off to world championships, we celebrate them. We celebrate them on the morning news. We won 9 of 14 awards, just British Columbia breweries, microbreweries, and at the championships. And we wake up in the morning and we hear that on the radio. That's something that is celebrated. The ingenuity of small business owners, the ability for them they're chemists. And the same goes for this industry as it matures in our province in a legal fashion. And so I think what's important is that as we've seen with alcohol production, that there's vertical integration there where you can produce and you can also have a place that you can sell that. I was at my friend's winery and he's got his wine there that he produces and he sells. And then there's also a way for him to supply in a geographic area. There's a way for him to supply local stores directly. The paperwork goes through the liquor distribution, but for small scale producers, I should say, some of the rules have been amended and changed to allow for that. And I think that as our laws and as we understand how those laws work, and as we set them up, and that is something that I think that needs caution, patience always. We're setting these laws up, and we see how they are executed. I think this is something, an opportunity for British Columbia as we go forward for the craft industry. All right, and just I guess just finally, I think that there's a couple more things that I'd like to point out. I did hear the minister the other day point out the significant challenge I think we've got right now with the Washington State, British Columbia, state, province, federal government of the United States that runs that border. And I think that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be sufficiently confused by that, and it could cause a lot of problems. And what I hope is that both the state and the province and the federal government of Canada can figure it out with Washington, D.C., that is. Because I think that there's going to be people that are going to be confused. I don't think that they're going to intend to break any laws, and that's going to catch a lot of people. And again, I think the goal here is to not criminalize people. Even those that say that the laws here go way too far. The fact of the matter is we are criminalizing far too many people with this product, and I think that the goal here is to not criminalize people on both sides of the border, but yet we've got the American federal government that runs that border. So I know that British Columbians, Canadians could get themselves into a lot of trouble at that border, same with our American friends coming north. So I think that it is really important that we do sort that out. Finally, I would say that there is, if I should go back to the point where I was talking about private property owners and perhaps lack of place for them to consume cannabis. One of the ways, of course, and other provinces have done this. They've created cannabis lounges or For alcohol products, we call them pubs or public houses, a bar. And I recognize the significant challenge of smoke indoors. I recognize that. But I think that one of the ways that we can get around and ensure that there is a place for people to, I mean, this is, after all, it's a controlled substance, but they're going to be allowed to participate and consume it recreationally, that perhaps we want to take a look at having cannabis lounges in some way, and perhaps that's a further evolution of the law as we go forward. So I think, in general terms, we're very supportive of the government taking this action. I think the minister and the ministry and the drafters have done a good job in crafting a framework for us to work within. I hope that we can identify some challenges that come up and address them promptly as we go and evolve as this industry and this province evolves. And I think that there's an opportunity for British Columbia here to be progressive, to be leaders, to lead the country. And I think in some cases in this legislation we are. In other cases we can push it forward and even be more progressive. So with that, I'll take my seat and thank the minister for the bill, and come down and visit you in just a minute. So thank you, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity.